I'm really excited to be here with you guys because I love my job. I love talking about this topic, about child abuse. Now, I do want to just give a disclaimer that this presentation is completely from my lens, from my viewpoint, being a director at a center in an urban place in Utah County. I'll talk a little bit about the differences between our urban and rural centers, because we do work very closely, all the children's justice centers throughout the state. But I just want to put that out there. All right, so what is Children's Justice Center? Is everyone pretty much familiar with what we do? Okay, we'll do just like a very brief overview. So obviously, in order for children to get to us, they need to be able to have reported abuse to law enforcement or Division of Child and Family Services, and they have opened an investigation, right? And they have scheduled a time to bring the child to the center. So it is a coordinated team response. Really, I see the role of the Children's Justice Centers is to be that collaboration and that touch point for our multidisciplinary teams. And so we do work very closely with Division of Child and Family Services, law enforcement, our victim advocates, who there's a lot of them in this room, our prosecutors, and so on and so forth, juvenile court. But really our goal, right, is to reduce the trauma that the child is experiencing as they're going through our criminal justice system, which is we all have talked about, not a great process to go through. So CJCs, they are a home-like facility, and we are established through state code. I'm just gonna give an overview kind of CJC services. If we can get it to play.
They matter because our children are our most precious legacy. And if we can't help our children in the most traumatic of situations, it seems to me that we failed. I started with the judge, I went to social workers, I went to a number of people that were in the system that were working with children, and I was so concerned about it, and they kept saying, well, you know, we aren't doing a very good job.
I walked towards the area where I was to see this little girl, and she was about a 5-year-old, as I recall, and she was sitting in front of a desk with the detective dressed in uniform behind. On both sides of her were other desks with other detectives interviewing other people for a variety of things. One was a witness to a homicide, as I recall, another was a burglary suspect, and this little girl was seated on that chair, and she was scared to death. And she was not able to say anything. And so the concern was, we think that she was abused, but how do we put a case together if she can't talk to us? The hope was that you could conduct one interview by a trained and experienced investigator, whether it was a DCFS investigator or a police officer, and that interview would be videotaped, and then you wouldn't have to do it again. So you'd only have to tell that story once.
We finally came down to the issue that this is probably the best thing. And the important thing was that the police felt it was, the district attorney's office felt it was, and the critical parties, they were the ones that had to feel good about this.
I was sitting in a committee meeting that I had no association with, and just happened to be there when Greta presented a video to the committee about the center in Huntsville and how they had taken a lovely old home, and we were familiar with the area, and had taken this almost antebellum style home and converted it into a warm, and caring environment to where children could be helped rather than just interviewed.
Myself and Senator Peterson both were looking at this and saying, you know what, we've got to convince at least 38 of our colleagues in the House and 15 of our colleagues in the Senate and one man downstairs that this is a better way to do it.
And so we talked about it, and I know I really, personally and as a lawyer, I've seen that trauma. I do criminal defense work, and I've seen what children go through. So I was really excited about the program. She indicated she had talked to Senator Craig Peterson. He was going to carry the bill, and I said, I'll do all I can to help him.
I think the real thing was, for me, was seeing no one questioned anybody's politics. We only questioned, will this work? Will this provide a better service for the children? And when you take that approach, politics doesn't matter.
It was that lighthouse in a storm. I don't know what I would have done without it. I don't know how things would have gone. I daresn't think of how they would have gone if there wouldn't have been some place like the center to handle the situation the way that it was handled. Practically every county has a center, and every one of these centers, private money has been raised in that town, in that county, to do what has to be done so that the plea to the legislature is valid. And I think it's just absolutely amazing what has happened, the way it has grown. But I think as people became more and more educated, it was clear that this was the program that needed to happen so that we could handle this issue.
It's remarkable and tremendously impressive that in such a short period of time, if you really think about it, for a grassroots movement especially, that there's been this dramatic growth of Utah CJCs. And I think it really speaks to the community involvement as well as the commitment of the Utah Attorney Generals to this model and the county attorneys to this model. It has been so incredibly impressive. I can't think of another state that's grown as dramatically in such a short period of time.
I think our centers have been very well run. I think the work that's been done here has helped spread the concept all around the country, and we've been very open and sharing in everything that we do, and we've been happy to take advice and help from others as well.
I don't think we can ever measure the value we brought to children who've been through this traumatized event and now are not as traumatized further because of what the center does.
The healing process really begins in the centers as they're warmly received, as these trained people can reach out to parents, to children, and begin to embrace and help them begin the healing.
I know there's thousands of kids, unfortunately, that have had to deal with this and go through the center, and I'm glad that there's this haven for them, and not only for the young victims, but for the parents and for everybody who is involved.
My hope for Children's Justice Centers in Utah is that we will not lose the vision of what created it. The idea of a partnership between the community, with volunteers, with state support, with community support. That model makes the Children's Justice Center work.
Personally, I think it's the most important public thing I've ever done. My family is most important to me, and I've had the opportunity to be involved very much with the University of Utah and Harvard University, but this has been the most important because I can see the difference that it's made.
since the Attorney General's office did that movie, they actually have expanded, and now every single county in Utah has a Children's Justice Center. Thanks again to Tracy Cabot and her team in the Attorney General's office and for leading those efforts. If you do not know your local CJC, please reach out to them. They are absolutely incredible people, the directors, and are there to help. Okay, so another thing I just wanted a disclaimer I wanted to add in here with my personal lens and bias is that I believe as adults, we all need to protect kids. It is our job. It is on all of our shoulders. So what is child abuse? As you guys know, I mean, this is established in the state code, right? Like, has anyone actually read this code? I have. Guess what? Here's the great news. You guys don't need to read this code. You do not need to know like what the code says. What you need to know is, has a child been harmed? Period. Okay. So let's see. As we kind of move into like talking about child abuse victims and the different barriers that they experience, for me, I think one of the biggest barriers that we still have with child abuse is stigmas in our community. And in preparing for this presentation, I thought it would be fun to go back and look through some old material that we used to give out. And we used to give out this myths and facts sheet. Now, this sheet was developed in 1995, so nearly 30 years ago. So I thought it would be fun to kind of go through and see if you guys have still heard these stigmas or myths about child abuse, okay? So the first one we have here is, child sexual abuse occurs only among strangers. If the child stays away from strangers, they will not be sexually abused. How many of you, I mean, okay, we're all trained like professionals in this room, but how many of you guys have actually heard this from other people in the community? One person. Raise your hands. Who has actually heard this from people in the community? Stranger danger? Okay. We will get into some stats as to who actually is abusing children in our community. But really in the stats back then, it was 85% of children know their abusers. It actually has decreased since COVID. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but our recent stats is more like 67%. So unknown has increased in recent years. Okay, here's our next one. Children provoke sexual abuse by their seductive behaviors.
That was a trigger for me right now.
Right? Yeah, I have heard this from people in the community. I have heard this. I mean, I've been to a lot of trainings where perpetrators say this, right, in their interviews. Obviously, we know, right, that isn't it. The responsibility always lies with the offender. Always. Okay. The majority of child sexual abuse victims tell someone about the abuse. Yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? Like, have you guys heard this before? Like, do you guys think kids tell people? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of heads go nuts. Okay, yeah, obviously, like, they're with kids, most of the time it's delayed disclosure. And it's delayed disclosure until they find a safe person to talk to, right? That's why there's delayed disclosure. They have to be safe. They have to feel safe with someone or in a different environment to finally talk about what's happening to them. Okay. This is so terrible, guys. I'm sorry that I'm reading this. It's from 30 years ago. If the child did not want it, they could say stop. Or with your adult victims, how many times have you guys also heard that, right? Like, if they didn't want it, they could just say stop. As we know, obviously, children generally do not question adults. And they've been taught to obey adults. So, and, you know, obviously, like, there is a lot of grooming that goes on with children, and we're moving really away from that. And into more of terms of what it actually is, which is manipulation of children. Okay, let's see. Oh, what about all sexual abuse victims are girls? Have you guys heard that one? That most of the time it's girls who are being sexually abused? Okay, I'll show you guys some stats. Obviously, it's not just girls. And in fact, that, fact sheet that I did upload from the National Traumatic Child Stress Network and CTSN, they have stats on there, and what they just recently referenced was, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused before the age of 18. If you guys have not signed up for their newsletter, go and sign up for their newsletter. They have incredible trainings, this National Child Traumatic Stress Network. If you work with kids, please go get some of their trainings and go read their fact sheet. They are an incredible organization, a lot of great information. Family sexual abuse is an isolated one-time incident. No. Obviously not, right? You guys have heard these stories. Studies indicate most child sexual abuse continues for at least 2 years before it's reported. And in most cases, it doesn't stop until it's reported. Now I had a different one on here, but honestly, I think they were like afraid to put homosexual on this sheet back in '95. But let's talk about these recent stigmas of like transgender people are the ones who are committing child sexual abuse. Have you guys heard this myth? Yeah, I mean, it's all over the internet, right? Let's get into the stats then of like, who is actually abusing kids? Okay. So when we talk about child abuse, we talk about who is being abused. As I mentioned, these stats are just from my center. Just kind of trying to give you guys an overall view of what those stats look like about the kids who come through our Children's Justice Center. Now, as you can see that there are more females reporting than males, however, and we haven't looked at these stats probably honestly in like 10 years. But when we looked at these stats about 10 years ago, what we noticed when we broke it down by gender and age is that up until teenage years, it's equal. The reporting is equal between males and females. And then once you get into teen, males drop off significantly. In my opinion, that's because of underreporting, not because it's not happening to our teen boys. Okay, and so I do have to say that, you know, at the Children's Justice Center, we're not seeing all child abuse, okay? It's a very specific, like, we mostly see obviously sexual abuse. Some serious physical abuse, some witnessing violence, domestic violence or homicide. But the majority, and so as I'm speaking today about resources and that, obviously that is what my main focus is. All right. Okay, so who's abusing kids? 25% are parents. 22% are other known persons. You think we only have 33% unknown. And most of the time, it is someone who is close to that family and a trusted adult. Okay, now this one I feel like is important to talk about because look at our under 18. This is the age of the alleged offender. So in Utah County, we've got 23% of allegations are with children with problematic sexual behaviors. We do not call children offenders. We call children what they are, children with problematic sexual behaviors. And there is something we can actually do about that. there are interventions that we can do about our juvenile offenders. In fact, so there was a study done, this is from 2002, which talked about 70% of adult offenders who have serious offenses, meaning that in like a period of a year, they've committed more than one sexual assault. 70% of this study said that they started that behavior when they were juvenile. That's when it started for them. So if we're gonna have that, I mean, and as they become adults, the study also continues to say at the rate of general reoffense was reported at 99% for those who committed a sexual offense as a juvenile. These kids need intervention. These kids need to get in the juvenile justice system. They need to get help. They need to get treatment. Early intervention with our youth is key here. And part of the problem is, this is another barrier, right? Is that people don't want to report on kids. They don't want to like put kids through that. It was a cousin, it's in the family. I don't want to break the family apart, right? So the majority of the time, I'm actually going to be talking about what I think is the biggest barrier to child abuse, which is reporting, because it's not happening. So I hope everybody is aware of this law in Utah. We are all mandatory reporters, every single one of us. There is one exception, and that's for clergy. And good news, if there was to be some good, there were two good things that came out of this last legislative session. It was a weird session. Let's just put it out there. And it was, let's see, Bill HB 432. So the exception is that was before, if, an abuser reports to clergy, right, then in like a confessional, then they don't have to report that. So this new law actually allows clergy, it says that clergy may report it. Even if it was the perpetrator who disclosed it. So that's a tiptoe in the right direction, right? I mean, like, let's take the wins when we get them. Okay, now, let's see. Along with, barriers to reporting, probably the biggest, there's three areas that we see this, has the biggest issues. One is in the schools. The schools are not reporting. The kids report to the school's admin. They're not reporting. In fact, if you even just Google right now, you will get lots of articles about school districts in Utah not reporting child abuse. A couple years ago in Park City, actually their prosecutor filed charges against the school district for not reporting child abuse. They did end up settling out of court. And as part of that, they decided to do a mandatory reporting education in the schools. They have 6 schools up in Park City, so they've been able to do that. So there's some good things that can come out, of these situations. So there is a long, long way for us to go. If you look up right now, schools in my county, Alpine School District in particular, in the news, you will see that just last year, they had over 100 sexual assault cases by students and teachers that they failed to seriously investigate. The feds came down and said, you guys need to actually investigate these cases that are getting reported to you. Part of that issue is that we've got several different systems that, surprise, surprise, are not talking to each other or coordinating with each other, right? So we've got Title IX officers, all right, with the feds. Are we all familiar with Title IX officers? They started in the colleges, right? And now they have put them in every single public school with no education on how to interview kids. They have given them no training on that. They just have said, you need to investigate and interview them and discover if there's been policy violation. So we've got Title IX people investigating cases. They are referring it to, sometimes to the SROs, the school resource officers. If I use an acronym, please just correct me. And guess what, our SROs, last learned about the cross-reporting law that they're supposed to report to DCFS any child abuse cases that they receive, when they were in the academy. So how many of those SROs do you think remember to cross-report? I mean, I'm guessing it's like a small percentage. So when the SROs go through training, it's a national training, and nobody's teaching them about local reporting laws. So what we're seeing at the Children's Justice Center, as these cases are reported to the schools, we're seeing, unfortunately, 3 investigations happening again, which is the whole purpose that the CJCs are supposed to reduce, right? So we're seeing them after they reported to the school admin, they conducted their investigation, the SROs have done theirs, and the parents are still like, where is this help for my kids? And they report it to DCFS, and then that's how they come to our center. I'm gonna talk about solutions later, guys, but we do have a lot of barriers that we have got to get through. So the next barrier that I see to reporting is with therapists. And any of you are familiar with Brene Brown? Okay, she says if you are in their arena, then you get to speak, okay? I'm in the arena, so I'm gonna speak about it, all right? Therapists, seriously? I cannot, okay. You guys, I'm gonna tell you specific examples of when therapists are not reporting. So a lot of therapists are now getting degrees online. And again, when you get degrees online, you're not getting that training of local reporting law. So I had one therapist, in the community call me and tell me that their client had disclosed abuse. Her supervisor was seeing the parent. Her supervisor told her that the law says if you have reason to believe. But I'm seeing the parent and they're saying this kid's lying. And so if the kid's lying, we don't have to believe them and we don't have to report it. A therapist, you guys. And you know what's worse? They called Bethel and Bethel was like, yeah, that's right. Don't you worry. I got the AAGs on them. All right, everybody's got training now on what this actually means. Reason to believe doesn't mean if you think a kid's lying, you don't get to report it. That's not what the law means. It means if you think a kid's being harmed, report it. Last week, my staff sat in an ethics training for therapists, put on by a therapist. And what they said about mandatory reporting was, we are all mandatory reporters, okay? However, you can use your best clinical judgment to decide if it's gonna cause undue harm and stress to the inmate and the victim. You don't need to report. You better believe my staff spoke up and said, yeah, you do it. I think it's time and time again. I mean, I think we all hear the reasons why people don't want to report, you know? Like I said, you know, they're kids, but as I mentioned, let's get them some early intervention, right? Or, I don't want to ruin someone's life. What if I'm wrong? I hear that one a lot. But what if you're right? And we saved a kid from being harmed or continuing to be harmed? What if you were right? If you guys take anything away from this presentation, the importance of reporting, getting those kids to the CJC, to that soft landing where they can get resources, where they know that they can be supported. I had one of my, my treatment supervisor gave me a story for another presentation I was doing. Most of the presentations I do are begging for money, you know, so they always want to hear a story. So I told this story about this 15-year-old teen boy who came in. He didn't want to come and get treatment and therapy at the CJC, but his mom signed him up and he did. And he's starting to feel better. He had, done his trauma narrative and everything. And then later on, he was still going through the court system, and the courts asked him to fill out a questionnaire that brought a lot up for him. And he knew where he could go back to get help. Came back to the JC, he got back in treatment. We never ever close the doors to our kiddos that come to our center for that reason, because we know that developmentally, as they, go through different phases in life, the abuse is gonna come back up for them. And as they go through the court system, for sure, it comes up. Okay, any other barriers that you guys have heard about, seen in your communities? Okay, great. Well, let's get to lunch, shall we? Let's talk about solutions. Okay, so obviously I think one of the best solutions is educating our children about body safety and prevention. Again, there was another good piece of legislation that came out in our session this year, and it was SB 205, which has a $1.5 million fiscal amount actually attached to it to do sexual education prevention in the schools. So hallelujah, right? We are making some movement in the right direction. And thanks so much to the policy project for really driving that one. And as I mentioned, but as this rolls out in the schools, this education, we have got to do a better job at fixing our response in the school, right? So what we, as I mentioned, kind of what other CDCs have done in a smaller community where they could take on going and educating people in the schools. We have 200 schools. There's no way that we're ever going to be able to get into all the schools in Utah County. So what we're trying to do is we're piloting, we've got 2 Title IX officers that have agreed to work with us and pilot a different way of approaching these cases, a different way of communicating about them. And we're hoping that if that goes well, we can roll it out countywide and statewide. Now, therapists, to address the issue of therapists not reporting. One of the things that we've done is my treatment coordinator or supervisor, Wendy, has put together and gotten approved a 1-hour ethics CEU for therapists on mandatory reporting. We would love to offer it to any therapist that you guys know. Any of them. Wendy H at utahcounty.gov. I told her already I was being human. She will be expecting a lot of emails. And I think I really just wanted to drive home with solutions. I mean, we had an amazing presentation already, from our traffickers, but our trafficking presentation. I'm sorry, it's my bad. You guys really, sorry. But they talk about this collaboration, right? And 100%, that is where we're gonna find solutions. If you guys have noticed, I mean, none of those solutions, they happen alone. We have to connect with each other and make sure that we're working towards this common goal and building those relationships, asking your community partners, what is it that you guys need? How can I support you? Get curious with what their policies are, with what their regulations are, with what their job duties are. What do they have to do? And how do we talk about it and communicate about it so we're not duplicating work, but that we're making the system easier on all of us? Please get curious with your community partners. Yeah, I think really just the thing I just wanted to wrap up with is, speaking of community, is that I recently, just last week, talked to a researcher who's talking about burnout in this field. And guess what she told me the #1 factor of burnout is? And guess it. Yeah,
Not seeing results from your training.
oh my gosh, well, I feel that one. She said not seeing results from all of the work, right, that we're putting in. Isolation. Yeah,
You don't do self-care.
no self-care. Okay. I think there's a lot of things that cause us burnout, but according to the research, the number one thing is if you do not have a sense of community. Yep, they tell you, you guys were right. So please reach out, and if you don't have that community, build it, build it. Don't wait until there's a problem. It'll be a lot easier if you have those relationships established, and if you can talk to your partners about it. Is there that is kind of all I had, you guys. I realize that we are like really early. I don't think anyone's gonna get too mad at
I just
me.
have like 2 questions
Unless
in the
Vicky.
chat. I won't get mad. No, of course not. Absolutely not. One question was, are there steps that a parent has to follow when reporting like abuse? Because sometimes they're not receiving the proper assistance and they don't know what to do. So if they learn their child's being abused, steps for a parent.
Yes, steps for a parent, just call the number and don't ask your kid. Don't coach them, don't record them, like, that makes things a lot more harder, like, it's so much more difficult for law enforcement and DCFS to do anything with that case when parents get overly involved. And I know that's really hard for parents to like, take a step back. But what we try and explain to them at the Children's Justice Center is you take a step back from the investigation and still emotionally support your child. We're not asking you to like isolate your kid and don't talk to them. That's not what we're doing, right? We're just saying, don't ask them questions about it. If you ever ask a kid a question about it, you leave it open-ended. Tell me everything about that. It's our very favorite phrase at CJC. Tell me everything about that.
And then the other question is, can someone refer a case to the CJC if the case was closed by law enforcement because the child didn't reveal anything to the DCFS worker? DCFS didn't recommend a forensic interview, so the case was closed and would not do an interview, but child revealed sexual abuse to the parent.
Yes.
Or is there somewhere else more appropriate?
All right, yes. So what I would say is it depends on your CJC. So I would definitely connect with them and see what resources they have available. I will just speak to Utah County. Yes, we do accept those referrals. So we do have our own treatment program. And so if it's been reported, if we can verify it's been reported, we always make sure to report, then we can provide services. Yeah.
What would you do in a case that you have a victim of domestic violence? Because I was learning from my TV and there was a son who had like a 3 or 4-year-old, and you could just tell that that child was severely disrupted. But then the mom was going through a lot of like domestic violence stuff. So then I like kind of tabled it with my team and we didn't report it. But then, as a mandated reporter, like that's obviously neglect. But then it's sticky because we didn't want to put the mom through more stuff because of domestic violence. So
Yeah.
what would what's a good way to kind of balance that?
Right, that's such a great question, and I think it's the one that we run into a lot, so just to repeat the question so you guys didn't. For those who didn't hear, she was asking about domestic violence victims. And how when they're trying to leave and they have a kid that maybe also is being like neglected because of the situation that they're in and everything. That sometimes people choose like not to report that neglect of that kid, because what about this domestic violence is she's going through enough, right? And she's trying her best to get out of the situation. What do we do in that situation? My staff is gonna tell you why. I'm not there for it. Because what I think we don't understand about reporting to DCFS is, I think there's this really big fear, like, that kids are gonna be removed. I think there's still a lot of stigmas there with like, what's gonna happen with the investigation with DCFS. I'm gonna tell you what's gonna happen. They're gonna go and talk to her and they're gonna find out what kind of supportive services you need. They can do in-home supportive services for those families. They can actually provide more resources for that family. if you report it. So please report. Okay.
Agreed.
Any other
And
questions
I
or
don't
any
have them
other?
Chat, but if there's any.
Okay, anything else? Okay, thank you guys so much for letting me take.